Good morning or good afternoon, depending on when you start this. Sorry I couldn't be there in person today, but I am recording for Central Texas Gardener today, so keep an eye out on that if you watch that. So I was asked to cover vegetable pest identification, and I'm also going to cover some management as well. So these are the common ones that you're going to typically see, because I had to limit myself, I can't go through everything. So since I'm not there to answer questions as we go along, if you have questions, my contact information will be at the end of the presentation. Please feel free to send me an email and ask whatever question you may have about insects. All right, so the first insect, we're going to start off with the piercing mouthparts. So these are our sap-sucking insects, and a lot of these are going to be small, relatively soft-bodied. And our first one is going to be the aphids. So these are tiny. They're less than 1/4 of an inch in size, and they do come in various colors. You can see there's a variety here on this slide. We have the kind of grayish ones on the left-hand side, greenish on the right. We also have ones that are pink, there's yellow, there's black. They're kind of all over the place. But they do have a kind of oval or teardrop-shaped body. They are pudgy. They have long antennae, and then at the tip of their abdomen, they're going to have what are called cornicles, and they little tailpipes that come off of the tip of the abdomen there. And the immatures are going to look very similar to the adults, but they're going to be smaller in size. Some of the aphids are going to have wings, but not all of them. You can see in the picture on the right-hand side, this aphid in the bottom left-hand corner actually has wings. The ones that you see that have wings are going to be the male aphids. The female aphids and the immature aphids do not have wings. And aphid populations can really get out of hand fairly quickly because the females don't necessarily need to mate to produce offspring. And the other part that kind of compounds that is that they don't lay eggs. They actually give birth to other aphids. And then those aphids can then go on to lay more aphids. And so you just have like this huge, everybody's pumping out aphids kind of thing. So their populations can grow very rapidly when they have good resources. So here is the kind of teardrop shape that you see, and you can see here, I do want to point this out, this little drop that's coming off of the tip of the aphid there is the honeydew. That is the excrement that a lot of these sap-sucking insects will produce, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. So here you can see the long antennae on the picture there, and the next one should be the cornicles. So upper left-hand corner here, you can see the cornicles that are coming off of the tip of the abdomen. So it just looks like, two big tailpipes there. Our next sap-sucking insect are going to be the whiteflies, and these are going to be found on the underside of the leaves. So if you are not turning over the leaves and checking what's on the underside of it, you are never going to see the whiteflies unless you have the adults fly out. And usually that happens if a plant is disturbed. The adults will fly out from the leaf surface and then they kind of go right back. The immatures on these are going to be wingless, oval shaped, but the adults do have wings, as you can see in that picture there. So if you look at the two, the left-hand side picture with the adults, those are the ones with the wings, and they do have their wings kind of in a tent shape or triangular shape over the body, whereas on the right-hand side you can see the immature stages are going to be just wingless and oval shaped, but they do kind of have that, that waxy whitish stuff that comes over their body. And all of these are going to have piercing sucking mouthparts and feet on the plant. Our next sap-sucking insect are going to be our stink bugs and harlequin bugs. So the bottom two pictures that you see here are the harlequin bugs, And harlequin bugs are just a more specific type of stink bug. That's a particular species. So on the upper left-hand corner, we have a green stink bug, but we have multiple types of stink bugs. And the interesting thing, not all stink bugs feed on plants. We do have some predaceous stink bugs as well. But the harlequin bugs that you see on the bottom, they are very distinctive. They do have that red and black coloration that makes them look like a harlequin, which is where they get their name. And typically I tend to see those on cruciferous crops, and usually they show up when it's really time to pull those plants out and they're kind of at the end of their life. So if you have populations of harlequin bugs, it may be a sign that you just need to kind of throw in the towel on that particular back. And they have what is called a hemielytra, which essentially means that they have a half-hardened wing. So the circled part that you see here on the wing is the hardened part of the wing, and then the back part is going to be membranous. So the immatures are going to look very similar to the adults. The coloration might be a little bit different, and they are also not going to have fully developed wings. They will start developing wing pads as they go through those instars, but they don't have fully developed wings until they hit that adult stage. Moving on to our foliage feeders. Our first ones are going to be spider mites, and these are not an insect. These are actually a type of arachnid, more closely related to spiders, ticks, and scorpions. And these are very tiny. You may or may not be able to see them with your naked eye. That really depends on the species that you're dealing with, as well as the life stage that it's in, and eyesight. So this may be something that you might just see the webbing that they create on the plant, and you might need a good hand lens or a microscope or something to see the actual mites themselves. They do have 8 legs outside of the first stage out of the egg. That first stage out of the egg only has 6 legs, but then when it molts into the next stage, the rest of them are going to have 8 legs. They have no antennae. They do have that oval-shaped body, and they come in various colors. You can see that there's a plethora of colors on here. And they do create that webbing. So that webbing is going to start off on the underside of the leaf, and then as their population grows and expands, they will use that to cover more parts of the plant. So when we look on the very right-hand picture, I do want to point this out because there's more than just spider mites going on in that picture. The spider mites are up at the top portion and to the right-hand side where you see the webbing. You can see those little tiny kind of orangish, reddish mites, and those are the spider mites. But down at the base of the plant, kind of in the stem area, those bright yellowish orange insects, those are oleander aphids. So there's multiple things going on. And then that white insect that you see right above the oleander aphids, that is actually a ladybug larvae that is beneficial and there to feed on those aphids. So that one is a particular ladybug larvae called a mealybug destroyer, and they look very similar to mealybugs, but they are predators. So you need to be careful and make sure when you're looking at stuff that you know if it's a mealybug or a mealybug destroyer. All right, our next foliage feeder is going to be the flea beetles. And these are relatively small beetles, anywhere from a 1/16 to a 1/4 of an inch in size. They do have various colors. A lot of them are very pretty and have patterns on their body, but they can be black. A lot of them are going to be metallic. Some of them are going to be blues or greens or bronzish colors. And with flea beetles, they are going to have their hind legs expanded for jumping, like a flea, which is where they get their name from. So if you look at the top picture over here on the left-hand side, you can see the femur of those hind legs are enlarged, and that's just to hold the muscles in there to allow them to jump. The adults and the immatures can cause plant damage. The adults are going to typically feed on foliage of the plants, and a lot of times when you have flea beetles, it has little tiny holes that they're chewing in that foliage. The immatures are going to be small, kind of a creamy white color, worm-like. They're kind of like little tiny grubs, but they are going to be feeding on the roots of plants, and they're not often seen unless you're digging around in the ground. But since these are very, very small, they are very easy to overlook. If you're thinking like regular white grubs for other species of beetles, think much, 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 much smaller. Because the adults of these are a 1/16 to a quarter of an inch, so you can just imagine those larvae are going to be very, very small. Our next foliage feeder is, we're moving into our caterpillars now, there's going to be quite a few of these. Our next foliage feeder are the corn earworms, and these are interesting because it's really dependent on what they're feeding on as to what their name is. It's all the same insect, but when they're feeding on corn, they're called a corn earworm. If they are found on tomatoes, they often call them tomato fruit worms. We have bollworms for when they're on cotton, and then for on soybeans, they are called soybean podworms. So the larvae of these are ones that are typically going to change color as they get larger. So the smaller larvae, you can see this in the upper left-hand picture there. The smaller larvae are going to be more of a creamy kind of tan color. And the larger stages, obviously when that caterpillar gets larger, the damage that it causes is going to be more extensive because they're bigger and they're going to require more food. So the larger larvae tend to be this pinkish or greenish color. You can see the greenish color on the tomato down there in the bottom picture. These are going to have stripes that run along their body lengthwise, and they're going to have 4 crow legs. So if you look, this is a corn earworm close up. So when I'm talking about true legs and crow legs, if we start on the right-hand side of this picture, you can see the head capsule there. So the true legs are going to be right behind the head. And they have 6 of those, and you can see that grasping onto the plant. The pro legs are kind of what we call false legs. And the insect is going to use them to grasp onto stuff. At the end of each of those kind of fleshy protuberances that we are calling pro legs, there are little tiny hooks that they can use to kind of grab onto stuff. And so you can actually see that it's kind of using those to grip. So we have the 6 true legs, and then we have those 4 pair of pro legs on the back part of the body. So that is the abdomen. And then the corn earworms are also going to have those black spines that are along the inside. They're not large spines or very distinctive spines, but they do have spines. They don't have a smooth body like some of the other caterpillars that we're going to talk about. So they do have those little spines there. If you happen to disturb these, they will either curl into a C shape or kind of wriggle around. They just want you to leave them alone. All right, our next one is a cutworm. This is our next type of caterpillar. And if you look at the middle part of the slide here, you can see that we have a lot of different kinds of cutworms. Typically, the ones that I run into the most or get questions on is the black cutworm and the variegated cutworm. These can get fairly large. They're up to 2 when they are getting ready to pupate. And these have very smooth bodies. They don't have those like spiky hairs like the corn earworm that I just mentioned. And like I said, these can be, pink, they can be brown, they can be green. Some of them are going to have stripes, some of them don't. And some of them are going to be very shiny, like you see in the upper left-hand corner. And some of them are going to be more of a dull coloration. And that is really going to help them kind of blend in and camouflage themselves. So these are ones that when you disturb them, it will curl into that C shape like you see in the right-hand picture there. The cool thing, well, it depends on the cutworm. Let me go to the next slide. Oh, no. So it depends on the cutworm species that you're dealing with, but there are some cutworms that are going to kind of cut plants off at where it meets the ground, so a lot of times you'll get them on seedlings. And for those ones, you can put like a can that has the tops and bottoms cut out, or a piece of PVC pipe or something. Push it down into the soil a little bit, and that will physically block those cutworms from getting to the seedlings. And those are ones that typically, once the plant gets, to a certain stage or growth, that's not going to really be a problem, so it can protect itself against those cutworms. So you really just want to kind of protect those transplants that you put in. There are other cutworms that are going to feed up on the plant, so it really, again, depends on which ones you're dealing with. The ones that feed on the plant are a little bit different because the ones that cut the plant off at the base tend to be nocturnal, and so you might not necessarily see them. You might just come out and you see these plants that have been clipped off and kind of left there. So that can be very frustrating. But if you have that, then you might want to look for cutworms. You can go out at night with a headlamp or something and kind of take a look around and see if you see those. So our next foliage feeder is going to be the armyworm. And the common ones that we have here, again, there's multiple species, but these are the ones that I typically have questions on, usually from people. So we have the fall armyworm that's on the left-hand side, and the beet armyworm that is on the right-hand side. And these are called armyworms because they tend to feed in groups, so they have their own little kind of army. But they are going to have greenish, smaller stages of larvae, and then when they get larger, the fall are going to turn this kind of grayish, brownish color, and they're going to have this inverted Y shape on the head that you see there. And then they are also going to have these kind of, they almost look like warts, so these little raised spots or bumpy protrusions that kind of go along the body area. And then, of course, they do have those lateral stripes that go down their body. The beet armyworm, again, they're going to have stripes along the body, but these are going to be a gray color, a green color, there we go, green along the back, and then on the underside, they kind of have that white dividing line that goes down the side of the body there, and below that line, it's going to be more of a greenish yellow to yellow color. Sometimes they also may go into a yellow to yellowish pink color. And then the other big thing, which most people don't look for these, if you look on the second thoracic segment, so if you remember, if you've taken my general entomology stuff, each pair of legs is attached to a section of the thorax. So we're going to look above the second pair of legs, and you can look for this little black dot that you see where that arrow is pointing. So that is going to be the beet armyworm. Our next foliage feeder is one of our loopers. This is going to be a cabbage looper. These are fairly small caterpillars, and they can be really kind of difficult to find because they get down in the cabbage, so it can be very difficult to see them or even get to them for hand picking isn't really going to be an option for these. But these are usually a pale green or a yellowish green, and they are going to have white stripes that go down their body, and they're going to have 3 pair of true legs, so those are going to be the legs that are behind the head, and then they're going to have what they call the immature stages. The adult of this is the spotted cucumber beetle, which you see in the upper left-hand corner. So the corn rootworm obviously feeds on the roots, a lot of times on corn. And the spotted cucumber beetle is going to feed on foliage and fruits of things like cucumbers, zucchini, squash, and kind of all those related plants. I used to rear these when I was in graduate school, and we actually reared them on slices of zucchini, and they love it. So these are going to be a yellow to a yellowish green beetle. They are fairly small, about 3/8 of an inch, and they're going to have 12 black spots on their elytra, or the hardened wings that you have, the top pair of wings. And if you look at them from above, I kind of say that they have a snowman-shaped body because they have a small head, the thorax is a little bit bigger, and then they have that large abdomen that would be the base of your snowman. And these are going to be in the family Chrysomelon. These are certainly not the only leaf beetle, but these are going to be the common ones that you're going to find usually in the vegetable garden. All right, so those are the common insects. We're moving now into the management part, because if I just told you what the insects are and didn't tell you what to do about them, you would probably be very angry at me. So as I do with pretty much all of my management suggestions, I will start off with the suggestion that you need to make sure that you are inspecting on a somewhat regular basis. And I'm not saying that you have to go out every single day and look for bugs. I usually check things in my yard like maybe once a week. And if I'm having like issues on something, I might check that one particular plant, every 3 days or so. But when you are inspecting, you need to make sure that you are doing it properly. That requires you to get up close and personal with the plants. You may need to turn over leaves. You may need to look at the base of the plant. You may need to pull some of them up, like you see the gentleman on the left-hand side here, pulling out some of those carrots. If you have something like corn rootworm, or you suspect something like corn rootworm, you're never going to see that insect unless you pull up one of the plants or so. The other thing is that you need to make sure you're prepared when you go out there for whatever you're finding. If you're not confident identifying things on your own, then you might want to take some containers with you to capture or collect whatever you find out there so you can get it identified. Or you can take your camera or phone or something that has that camera option on it, so you can take a picture of it and send that in for identification. If you're going to identify things yourself, then I would recommend that you get a good hand lens for some of these, because they are or can be fairly small, and it can be difficult to see features if you're just looking at it with your naked eye. And instead of searching hand lens, if you want to buy one online, I would suggest that you search for jeweler's loupe, because they're essentially the same thing, and they are going to be a fraction of the cost. Words on identifying things from photographs. If you are going to take pictures and send them in for identification, you need to, again, get up close. You need to use the zoom function on your phone, and if you're taking digital images, don't just take one. Everybody asks, well, how do you get pictures of insects that are so small? I take a ton of pictures, but the good thing about the pictures on my phone is I can delete all the ones that, the insect moved out of the frame, or it's blurry, or it's not quite close enough, it's too far away. All of those can be deleted. So it doesn't harm me in any way, shape, or form if I take 50 pictures and 3 of them end up being good. So take lots of pictures, take it from different angles, get the top side, get the side view, get, if you're taking pictures of damage, get pictures far away of the whole plant, get pictures close up. Don't be afraid of the insects. make sure that you move in and really kind of get things in focus so we can see detail. So this is the other thing. If you are sending in things for identification, it is always good to have a size reference in the photo, just because, you know, sometimes we need to know how big something is. And while a ruler or a tape measure is kind of the perfect world, I don't expect you to carry that around. It would be just as good if you have a coin in your pocket. I would ask for, you know, United States denomination of coins, so I can use that as a reference as to how something large is. It does not help me if your hand is in the picture, because I do not know how big your hand is. You can use like a standard bow, I would say that. A pencil doesn't really work because I don't know like how long or short your pencil is. Paper clips don't work because they come in different sizes. I'm trying to think if there's like I would say a pen, but I might not have the brand of pen that you're using. So, you know, use a coin, that would be easiest. And then if you want to identify things on your own, if you want like a basic insect book for Texas, the Common Insects of Texas book is really good. That is by John Abbott and Kendra Abbott. If you want a book that is specifically about garden insects, there is one that is called Garden Insects, and it is written by Whitney Crenshaw. He is out of Colorado. It is a very good book, has lots of information in it, and color pictures and things like that. So that is a good one to have as well. All right, so my next thing is sanitation. This is going to be, you know, this is kind of my typical IPM. You know, a lot of it is going to be prep work on the front end, so your plants are happy and healthy and are able to withstand populations of insects without you really interfering. So the sanitation is really cleaning up all of that schmutz that's in the garden from last season or whatever, reducing your weeds, limiting competing plants, and really kind of making sure that those overwintering insects don't have a lot of places to hide. And this, again, it's really going to be dependent on, you know, you and your beliefs and your kind of how you're doing things in your particular yard. So if you want to keep things, because I'm a keeper, it's what, the end of March, and I haven't removed or pruned down a lot of the plants that died off over the winter, because I keep things around for insects that might be using those as nesting resources. But I did clean out my vegetable garden. So the vegetable garden is someplace where I get rid of those things when the season ends. That way those insects don't have places to hide. But other places in my yard, I try to keep things so insects do have overwintering places. So there is a balance. I mean, we want to have places for beneficial insects to overwinter, but we want to try to limit and reduce the pests. So sometimes you can, you know, get a happy medium going on in there, but, you know, it doesn't mean that you're going to have zero pests. Watering is also going to help create your healthy plants. It's improved productivity. This means that you need to know your soil type. So there's that whole putting soil in a jar and with water and shaking it up and then letting it settle and kind of looking at the gradient and seeing, you know, where like clay versus sand versus all of that stuff. Why that is important is because it's going to tell you how your soil is going to drain. And that will then tie into the watering schedule. Because if you're on blackland clay, then that's going to be really heavy and it's going to hold water. Whereas if you're in a real sandy area, then that's going to drain very quickly and you might need to water more often or deeper or something. So always check your soil moisture to make sure that you actually need to water. You can either do that by poking your finger into it, or you can use a moisture meter. It is best to reduce fungal diseases in the garden, to use soaker hoses or drip irrigation for watering. But if you don't have that available to you, water your plants. It is important to make sure that they have that water, and that actually helps to carry nutrients down into the root zone as well. It is best to water in the morning or up to midday. You don't want to water in the evening, because then that's sitting on the plants overnight, and that can lead to fungal diseases. And then we don't want to water when it's really hot in the middle of the day. Fertilization is also very important. That's how your plants are going to get nutrients. And so this ties into the watering, because you need that water to carry that fertilizer or nutrients down into the soil to the roots. So man-made products are typically going to have a higher nutrient content, higher nitrogen in there, but you can use a variety of things for fertilization. There are people that make their own compost. There are people that buy compost. There's a ton of stuff out there. So there are links, obviously, as you can see as I go through this presentation. So if you need that information, again, at the end you'll have my contact information. Shoot me an email, and I'm more than happy to send that information to you. Spacing, this is another one. I'm kind of terrible at this, but if you are somebody who, let's say, you plant seeds for lettuce or something, you throw out a whole bunch of seeds and you have all these little plants that come up. I am terrible at thinning out those plants that are coming up, because I'm like, oh, there are all those plants and I don't want to waste that. Well, that can lead to lower production of your plant. It is going to have less airflow. It's going to be having them closer together to allow transfer of diseases and insects and things like that. So it can lead to problems. It can cause more stress on your plants, because there's more plants in that area fighting over resources. And so it is a best idea to space your things out. And you want to make sure that you space them not based on the size that they are when you plant them, but on the size that they will be when they are mature. And depending on what plants you are utilizing, I know in my garden, anytime that I grow something that has a vine, like right now I planted, I think I have watermelon and cantaloupe that I'm hoping to get before my dog eats them this year. I will put up like a heavy-duty trellis, and I go vertical with those. And you can do that with beans, any kind of large vining plant, your zucchini, squash, all of that stuff. And that gives you more space to utilize, and it can encourage airflow because it's not like they're on the ground, and it can reduce insects that are on the plant, because there are many insects that are going to hide under the foliage of those plants when they're lying on the ground. But if you're putting them up on a trellis, then that is going to be more difficult for those insects to kind of be in that hiding space, because they're not going to be there. And a good example of that would be like squash bugs that hide under the leaves of squash when it's laying on the ground. And the question that I usually get is, how do you grow watermelons and cantaloupe on a trellis and have that fruit grow? If you get cloth mesh bags, and these are like a real loose mesh, I will, when the fruit starts to grow in there, I put that mesh bag around it, and then I take a carabiner clip and I clip it to the trellis. That way the fruit is supported and it's not going to fall off of the vine. Plant selection. This is huge. And this might be something you would want to check with your Master Gardener group there in the area to see if they have a list of plants that do well in your part of Texas. So there are plants that are adapted to certain areas, and that can help you reduce the chance of various pests and diseases. And the other thing that plays into this is planting time. I know here in my area, we have, I know both for, because I work in Travis County and I live in Williamson County, so I know both of those have planting calendars for vegetables and whether you should plant seeds or transplants, and it kind of gives you a little guide as to when you need to do that. And I have mine hanging on the refrigerator, and I follow that as much as I can. So check with the Master Gardener group and see if they have the planting time calendar, and then see if they have varieties that do well in your particular area of Texas. Crop rotation is another thing that you can sometimes do depending on your yard and how much space you have. But if you have an insect that is causing problems repeatedly in a given area, then if you have the opportunity or the space to do so, grow that plant in a different area. And that will make it more difficult for those insects to find it. Because if I'm growing, we're just going to use the southern corn rootworm in corn. So if I'm growing corn year after year after year in the same space in my garden, and I end up getting southern corn rootworm there, they're going to be right in that area when I plant corn in that area again. So if I move that corn growing to a completely different area of the landscape, then that's going to take a while for those insects to find that corn again, and so rotate. And if you're doing this crop rotation, you need to think about it in terms of plant families, because if you're growing, I don't know, let's say, if you're growing squash and you plant zucchini there instead of squash, those are pretty much the same thing. So make sure that you switch up your plant families, not necessarily individual plants. Okay, soil prep. Again, this is preparing the soil to allow those plants to succeed on their own as much as you can. So we're putting a bunch of work in on the front end so we can make sure that our plants are going to have the requirements that they need to take care of stuff. So the soil preparation can help you improve drainage. I know where I'm located, I'm on limestone, so all of my stuff is grown pretty much in raised beds. I bring in soil, build up those beds, and then I can plant stuff, because if I try to dig, I hit rock within like 2 inches. So soil preparation, it can help you improve drainage. That helps you add nutrients to the soil. Those nutrients are going to be able to get down into the root zones of the plants. I know that says tilling, but that's not really what I do. I usually will take a hoe of some sort and kind of break up the soil. I add compost, I mix that in, and as you're doing that process, if you have pests in the area, that can turn over that soil, and that can allow those pests to become exposed to, predators, parasites, environmental conditions, and that can help to reduce those overwintering pests as well. Row cover is a great way to exclude pests from getting to your plants, and you need to make sure if you're doing row cover that you need to put it on before the pests are going to be on the plant, because if you cover those plants up after they're already on the plant, then it's going to essentially give them a free buffet, and they're going to be protected from predators and parasites. So a lot of people, you can either drape, like you see there. Usually what I see is if people are doing raised beds, they will take PVC pipe and bend that and make a frame of some sort to protect the plants. The row cover does allow sunlight and water to go through, but it will block those insects. Things that I do need to maybe point out: if you get holes in the row cover, the insects will be able to find those holes and get to the plants. If your row cover is not staked down at the bottom with like rocks like you see there, or I've seen people use logs, there's those landscape clip things that you can use. That is very important, so it's not flopping around. Again, if it's flopping around, that will allow the insects about row cover that I need to point out. If you have plants that are pollinated by insects, you will need to remove the row cover at some point when the plant is blooming, or you will not have those plants be pollinated, and then you will not have any fruits or vegetables. So, typically what I do if I haven't used row cover in a while, but I used to use it on my zucchini when I was growing it, and that was to protect against squash vine borer. So I would cover up the zucchini with row cover to protect it. When it was blooming, I would uncover it in the morning, and then I would cover it back up in the evening. And yes, there is the possibility that it would get infested with squash vine borer in that time, but it also is less exposure to that constant pressure treatment. Vacuuming and hand picking, these are other ways that you can reduce pests, and you can reduce pests very quickly. So this is not using any sort of a pesticide. The vacuum you see in the upper left-hand corner, that's kind of a professional vacuum, but you can get just a cordless, handheld vacuum that is dedicated for use in your garden and using to remove insects from the plant. And if you are doing that, I would recommend that you do not get a heavy-duty or top-of-the-line model. You want enough suction that it is going to take in the insects, but it's not going to inhale the whole entire plant. And then as far as hand picking, if you are going to hand pick, I would recommend that you use gloves on your hands to protect them. The insects, if they have mouth parts, they can use those to stab you or bite you. So it's always a good idea to protect yourself. You can either get a jar of soapy water or put rubbing alcohol in a jar and put the insects in there, or if you don't want to touch them, you can tap the insects into that jar, and that can reduce insects. I typically, if I'm doing either one of these, I will go out kind of first thing in the morning before the insects really get moving and try to do it at that point. High pressure water sprays, that is usually how I will how I will manage a lot of the smaller soft-bodied insects, so things like aphids, whiteflies, mealybugs, scale insects. Again, no pesticide is being applied. You need to water the plants anyway, so you're not going to have resistance of the population, and your plants are getting watered. So this is going to work best on small, soft-bodied insects. The ones that I mentioned before will work, but it can also be utilized against immature stages of other insects. So smaller caterpillars, or you can do it on, trying to think, like smaller stink bugs or leaf-footed bugs or things like that. And this high-pressure water spray is going to damage the exoskeleton. It's going to knock those insects off the plant, so they may not necessarily find their way back to the plant. It makes it easier because they're not in hidden locations, then it makes it easier for predators and parasites to find them. Obviously, high-pressure water sprays is not going to work well for insects that have wings and can fly away from whatever you're doing. So the high-pressure water spray, this is not using a pressure washer. That will completely destroy your plants. This that you see in the picture here, that is a specific tool that you can use that is meant for removing insects. I don't know if that is still available on the market or not, but you can certainly do an internet search to see. If not, get a hose nozzle and put it on the jet setting and use that to spray the insects. Plant collars, so this is what I was talking about earlier when I was talking about cutworms. These are going to physically block soil level insects from getting to the plants, and this is pretty much you finding stuff in the household that you can upcycle. The one on the left-hand side, I have seen people do this. They use toilet paper tubes. That is not going to work because as soon as those get wet, they are useless. So while people like those, and we usually have those kind of randomly around the house because I use toilet paper. I wouldn't recommend using those. So if you don't have cans or sections of PVC pipe, you can use aluminum foil like you see on the right-hand side. Just cut a small section, wrap it around the base of the plant stem that you're transplanting. And the key to doing this on any of these is making sure that you have an inch or so of that plant collar below soil level. That way the insect isn't going to kind of pop up underneath it. So you want to bury it partially. I really prefer using cans that I have, had fruits or vegetables or whatever, Wolf brand chili that my husband eats, and cut the top and the bottom of that. Obviously you want to clean them, but it's a great way to upcycle those items, and you can put those around your transplants, and it works really well. Mulch is another one. Yes, you can mulch your vegetable beds. I get that question from people a lot. They're kind of shocked. But that mulch is, if you're using a natural base mulch, is going to eventually break down and form compost and nutrients for your plants. So yes, you can mulch in your vegetable beds. It does prevent water loss through evaporation. It can reduce growth of weeds. It reduces the soil temperature, or helps to maintain it at a more constant level. It also can reduce fungal diseases because it's going to prevent those fungal spores from splashing up onto the plant when it rains or you water, depending on how you're watering. So again, as that mulch breaks down, it's going to turn into compost, and it can improve the soil structure and help movement of water into the soil. Trapping, this is not only going to capture particular insects, but it is a way to monitor for your insects. So depending on what you've got going on, you can either use a sticky trap like you see on the left, and that's like a homemade one that they just, put, I don't know, double-sided tape around a, looks like a PVC pipe or cardboard tube, and they have put that out, and you can use different colors. There's also pre-made traps that you can purchase. Just be aware that other things can get stuck to those, so be very careful about your placement, or you might get stuff on there that you don't necessarily want. The one on the right-hand side is something that you can use for things like squash bugs, or you can also use it for, a lot of times, snails. Those insects and mollusks, in the case of snails, are going to find those places to hide. So typically, if I have a squash bug problem, one, I try to trellis my squash to reduce those numbers that I would have, but you can put that cardboard out in kind of like a triangular or tent-like fashion, and those insects will hide underneath it at night, and then you go out in the morning, and you can pick that up and dispose of any of the insects that are on there, or snails or whatever. Companion planting, I am not going to cover this because there isn't really a lot of research that has been done on this. I do have those resources there if you want to look. I haven't checked to make sure that those are still active links, which I should probably do that because this was put together last year. But again, if you want information on that, shoot me an email and I will send you that information. And trap cropping, this is done by a lot of people. Again, this is really going to be dependent upon how large of a space that you have and how much room you have to plant stuff that you don't necessarily want to eat. Because a trap crop is going to be essentially a sacrifice. You are not growing that crop for consumption or whatever. You are using that to draw pests away from whatever plant that you are actually wanting to harvest. So you can either sacrifice that and allow the insects to kind of feed on it, and once it gets infested, you dispose of that crop and get rid of it, or you can use that to treat with pesticides, so you're reducing the amount of pesticides that goes onto the crop that you actually are wanting to harvest from. So the last thing is, I think the last thing, the last piece of this puzzle is using pesticides wisely. So note that I'm not saying do not use pesticides. Pesticides can fit into an ICANN program, but I would encourage you not to use them as your first choice. Try to use the other things that we've been talking about and use pesticides as a last resort. And then when you do choose pesticides, make sure that you are choosing a pesticide that is targeted as possible. So a low impact or less toxic option, so we can conserve the beneficials that are in our environment and helping us to manage pests. To go along with that, you want to target your treatment area. If you only have a problem on one plant, treat that particular plant. Keep all of the other stuff free of that pesticides. You always need to read and follow your labeled instructions. That begins when you go to the store to purchase something. You want to look at the label to make sure it can be utilized where you are going to use it. And that's why I say Texas is a site state. The location that you are using that pesticide needs to really be on the label. So if you're treating in a vegetable garden, it needs to say that you can treat in a vegetable garden, because not all pesticides are formulated to be utilized on the things that we are going to consume. So make sure that you are checking that label before you purchase that pesticide, and then you are using that pesticide as it should be utilized. So tons of resources. There's the book that I mentioned earlier, that Garden Insects by Whitney Cranshaw. That is a great book for this particular topic, the vegetable garden. And then of course we also have AgriLife Bookstore. Actually that's not AgriLife Bookstore anymore. It's now AgriLife Learn. So obviously I need to change that as well. AgriLife Learn, you can go on there and access not only publications about insects, but there's about canning and different types of plants and things like that. So again, there is my email over there, that is ebrown@ag.tamu.edu. If you need links, if you have questions, if you need things identified, please feel free to contact me. I am here, this is my job, and that is what I do, so don't be shy. All right, thank you so much for listening to me record.